Emily Carter sat by her apartment window, staring blankly at the Boston skyline. The sun was setting, spilling orange light across the concrete jungle, but all she saw was a blur of memories and unmet hopes. 34 and tired not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Love had become a cycle, bright beginnings, gradual fading, and painful ends. Her latest heartbreak, with a man named Richard, had left her gutted. They had talked about forever, dreamt about a shared life, but forever came crashing down in a storm of miscommunication and emotional unavailability. He left with an apology. She stayed with questions. That night, Emily found herself scrolling through pictures of small towns, quiet lakes, open skies, porches with rocking chairs and golden retrievers, a life slower, softer, and safe. That's when she discovered Willow Shade, a tiny town nestled in upstate New York. It looked like something out of a Hallmark movie, and that was enough. 2 months later, she was driving away from Boston, with her life packed into a Subaru. Her friends called it impulsive. Her therapist called it searching. Emily called it necessary. Willow Shade welcomed her with a gentle mist and the smell of pine. Her new cottage sat on the edge of a lake, surrounded by wildflowers and whispering trees. It was perfect, quiet, a blank canvas. And then there was Daniel. He was the owner of the town's only bookstore and cafe, a converted barn called Chapter and Brew. Tall, reserved, kind eyes. He made her chamomile tea on her first day and talked about poetry without sounding pretentious. Emily felt something stir. They began seeing each other. Coffee turned to dinners. Dinners turned to weekends. He had a wounded past, like hers. But unlike Richard, Daniel seemed honest about it, open, even. Emily started to believe she'd found it her province of love. This town, this man, this peace. She woke up to birdsong, read in hammocks, and cooked dinners that tasted like comfort. Daniel would bring fresh bread and read to her by candlelight. It was everything she had imagined, or so she thought. But sometimes, in the quiet, Emily felt a strange ache, like something was missing, not from the outside, but from within. Still, she pushed the feeling aside. This was what healing looked like. Right, slow, calm, beautiful. She didn't yet know. The silence she adored was about to start echoing with questions she wasn't ready to ask. It started subtly, a missed call, a text left unanswered for hours. Daniel, who once shared his thoughts freely, began to retreat into long silences. At first, Emily rationalized it. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he was thinking. But as the weeks passed, the space between them widened like the lake outside her cottage. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the twilight, she reached for his hand. He hesitated just for a second before taking it. A small pause, barely noticeable, but it rippled through her chest like thunder. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Daniel smiled. That distant, practiced kind of smile. Of course. Why wouldn't it be? But his eyes didn't meet hers. In the following days, Emily began to feel a sense of loneliness that the picturesque landscape couldn't mask. The conversations they once had over coffee now felt shallow. He stopped bringing her fresh bread. The poetry readings faded. She tried to ignore it. She baked his favorite apple pie, left notes on his windshield, planned a weekend getaway to a nearby vineyard. But each gesture felt like an echo, no response, no real presence. Daniel was there, but also not. and in that quiet absence, the ache inside her grew. One rainy afternoon, while organizing her books, Emily found an old journal from her college years. She opened to a random page. It read, "Never confuse peace with silence. Sometimes silence is just loneliness with better lighting." She froze. That night, she looked at Daniel over dinner and asked, "Are you happy here? With me?" He looked up, startled. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I can't tell any more." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I thought I was. I wanted to be." The air between them turned heavy. Not hostile, just hollow. Emily didn't cry. She just nodded. Something inside her already knew. The province of love was cracking, and she could no longer pretend it was just the wind. The vineyard weekend never happened. Daniel canceled last minute with vague excuses about needing time alone. Emily didn't argue. Instead, she drove there by herself, through winding roads bordered by early autumn trees. The golden hues felt indifferent to her loneliness. At the vineyard, she tasted wines she couldn't name, stared at couples who laughed easily, touched arms, kissed between sips. She smiled at the server, tipped generously, and walked alone through the rows of vines, pretending the silence was what she wanted. Back in Willow's shade, days turned colder. Daniel grew quieter. One evening, after another dinner eaten in near silence, he stood by the door and said, "I think I need space, real space." Emily didn't plead. She didn't ask how long or why. She just said, "Okay." After he left, she stood in the middle of her cottage, hands trembling. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was screaming. She sat at her desk, pulled out a blank journal, and began to write. "I came here looking for peace, thinking it was a place. I thought love would be found in stillness, in someone who didn't raise his voice or run away. But maybe love is not about quietness. Maybe it's about presence, real, raw, messy presence." She wrote until her hand cramped, until the pain dulled the ache in her chest. Over the next few weeks, she cried often, sometimes over tea, sometimes while folding laundry, but she also began noticing small things, the way sunlight warmed the porch at 9 a.m., the comfort of her favorite sweater, the pleasure of cooking just for herself. One morning, she opened the windows and let the breeze carry out Daniel's forgotten scent. She rearranged the furniture, painted a wall, bought herself sunflowers. She wasn't healed, but she was beginning. The province of love had broken, but something else, something quietly resilient, was being built in its place. Fall deepened, and with it came a sharper clarity. The trees shed their leaves unapologetically, and Emily took it as a sign. Maybe letting go didn't have to be dramatic. Maybe it was simply natural, a quiet, necessary act of growth. She joined a pottery class at the community center. Her hands, once trembling, began to mold clay into crooked mugs and imperfect bowls. They weren't beautiful, but they were hers. One day, she gave a misshapen cup to Mrs. Callahan, the elderly neighbor who always waved from across the lake. The woman smiled and called it perfect. Emily began taking long walks in the woods, often alone, sometimes with a borrowed dog from a neighbor. The air felt cleaner, her thoughts less crowded. She read books not about love, but about purpose, creativity, self-compassion. Her journals filled with questions and, slowly, with answers. One chilly morning, she stood by the lake with a letter in hand. It was addressed to Daniel, though she never planned to send it. In it, she wrote, "You didn't break me. You mirrored what was already unsteady, and for that, I thank you, because in breaking, I found my strength. She lit a match and watched the letter burn, its ashes dancing into the sky. The act felt sacred, not spiteful, but freeing. A few weeks later, she saw Daniel at the bookstore. He smiled gently. She smiled back. No words, no bitterness, just two people who once tried and now understood. That night, Emily sat by her window again, but this time not to mourn. She watched the stars blink above Willowshade and whispered to herself, I came here for love, and I found it not in him, but in me. Winter arrived with quiet grace. Willowshade, blanketed in snow, became a town of stillness and soft beauty. Emily embraced the season, not as a metaphor for loss, but as a celebration of pause. The lake froze, the trees rested, and so did she. She started teaching creative writing at the community library once a week. Her students ranged from teenagers to retirees, each with stories waiting to be told. In guiding others, Emily found herself. She learned that love shows up in many forms in shared stories. Laughter during grammar games, and the quiet nod of encouragement from someone finding their voice. She reconnected with herself, not through another romance, but through curiosity. She traveled alone to a nearby artist's retreat, hiked trails she used to find intimidating, and began painting again, messy, bold colors she never dared touch before. One afternoon, while sipping cocoa on her porch, a young couple strolled by hand in hand. They reminded her of who she used to be, longing, projecting, idealizing, but instead of envy, she felt compassion. Love was never the problem. The illusion of perfect love was. Emily wrote in her journal, love is not a rescue. It is not a final destination. Love is a companion to growth, not its substitute. On New Year's Eve, the town gathered in the square. Emily stood among familiar faces, her hands warm in knitted mittens, her heart steady. When the clock struck midnight, she didn't wish for romance or a soulmate. She wished for courage to keep growing, to keep choosing herself. And in that moment, surrounded by music and snowflakes, she felt it, the quiet, steady hum of contentment. Love had not failed her. It had led her home. If you find yourself in a love that feels incomplete, hollow, or heavy, it does not mean you are broken or unworthy. It means your soul is asking for truth, not fantasy. Sometimes we chase love in places that only reflect back our wounds, because we hope someone else can heal them. But real love, lasting love, begins within. Love is not something you lose when a person walks away. Love is what stays. When you remain, in your breath, in your effort, in your courage to keep showing up for yourself. So, if your province of love didn't turn out as expected, it's okay. Because the real one isn't found in others, it's discovered when you stop searching and start being. You are your own home. The end.